Get started here with this part of the Consortium for Innovation and Post-Harvest Loss and Food Waste Reductions webinar series. My name is Kyle Poorman. I'm the communications manager for the consortium and also the moderator for this event. We have a very exciting webinar on innovations in nutrition security and post-harvest loss reduction. It's a unique partnership between Iowa State University and institutions and communities in the Kamuli district of Uganda. And we have a set of panelists today: Dr. David Acker, Dr. David Acker, Dr. Tom Brum, Thomas Buyinza, and Dr. Steve Sonka. Just first of all, wanted to welcome you and to say that this webinar is being recorded so we can put it on our website. It's also being live streamed on YouTube. And I would like to acknowledge the member institutions of the consortium and also acknowledge our funders, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research and the Rockefeller Foundation, along with all the other institutions who are also contributing funds. Just a little bit about the agenda. We're going to have a brief welcome and introduction from Dr. Sonka. We'll have some presentations and then we'll have a question and answer session afterwards. And so without further ado, for the introduction, I turn it over to Steve Sonka. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyle. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar. And I certainly am looking forward to the topic and learning more about this important effort. I've for many years been interested and impressed with the dedicated efforts of our Iowa State University colleagues and their Ugandan partners as they focus on improving nutrition and reducing post-harvest loss. This seminar is hosted by the Consortium for Innovation in Post-Harvest Loss and Food Waste Reduction. I serve as its Associate Director. Today's webinar is one of a series of monthly events the Consortium hosts. The Consortium's multi-pronged focus addresses the key societal issues of preserving nutritious food and advancing livelihoods throughout innovations that foster ever-improving food systems throughout the world. One aspect of our mission is to engage thought leaders from throughout the world and from the private, government, and social and academic sectors in pursuit of those objectives. Today's webinar actively contributes to that objective. As Kyle mentioned, financial support is of course essential. I do want to acknowledge the support of the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, the Rockefeller Foundation, and that of the 9 research institutions in the consortium. With that, I'll turn the mic back to our moderator, Kyle. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sonka. And now I would like to introduce Dr. David Acker for his presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And I really look forward to sharing some of our experiences in Uganda with you. And I'm just going to start sharing my screen here so that we can go through a short presentation. I've been the director of our Center for Sustainable Rural Livelihoods for about 7 months. So still on the learning curve, and look forward to this webinar as a way to gather ideas, crowdsource good ideas for the future. Let's see. Our center was established about 15, 16 years ago with a grant and a challenge from a tremendous couple, happened to be alumni of our university who were dedicated to fighting hunger and poverty. They gave us a grant to get started working abroad, and they gave that grant to the College of Ag and Life Sciences. Since that time, we've been successful in raising funding from hundreds of our alumni and friends, and that private funding is an extraordinary gift, literally, because it gives us the latitude, the freedom to innovate, to stay until the job is done. And we have all learned from our experiences working with various granting organizations, sometimes that provide 3- and 4-year grants. And we know that there is power in being able to stay for a longer period of time. So we chose to work in rural Uganda. It was an all hands-on approach where everybody from graduate students to faculty to administrators got involved in the program. We selected Uganda to work in because it has both needs and tremendous opportunities. And the profile of the country is not dissimilar to some other countries in Africa. But one of the great things about Uganda is it has Makerere University and tremendous human and natural resources. So the growth potential and the development potential is really fantastic. We chose to establish our own NGO in Uganda, and that operates year-round with a staff of somewhere over 40 people, directed by Dr. Gideon Nadiope. And this tremendous team in Uganda is really the reason for our success. And we're dedicated to working through local expertise and find that to be most successful. Other elements, other than working through local expertise, we don't solve problems by ourselves as an external university. We work with communities to solve their problems. We take a long view. We certainly take a science-based approach, as the consortium does. And occasionally we invest in permanent facilities that are primarily public goods. That would be structures such as elementary schools and dormitories and things like that. Over the past 15 years, we've developed a model which we describe as a lifespan approach to capacity development. And it starts literally with the first 1,000 days and works through all of the different age groups that are important to improving a rural community. I hasten to add that we're not an expert in all these areas, so we often partner with others, and that I think is another key element of our strategy. And I'll walk through some of our strategic plan here in a moment, but I wanted to show that one of the strengths is that in our broad-based integrated rural development approach, we have a lot of interconnectedness. And I'll just give one example. Livestock, for example, may be working directly with farmers, but it's also working directly with primary schools so that they could raise chickens for school feeding, things like that. So a lot of interrelationships. Roughly, you can see here in the pie chart, a lot of attention in terms of the amount of money to community nutrition. Community and school nutrition is the largest investment, education being second, facilities, water, on down the list. Our strategic plan for the next couple years really has 6 important goals, and I'll go through these one by one just to give you a sense of what we're attempting to do. The first one is focused on nutritional security and health. And the 2 major elements here are nutrition education centers. We have now 10 of those, and they are run by women from the communities who have been specially trained and then turn around and train others. The second part of that is working at the elementary schools and developing a sustainable school feeding program so that a child will have a nutritious meal at midday. Our second goal is in the area of education, and it's literally from early childhood education on up through adult education. And I'll describe a little bit how we get some of our own Iowa State University students and Macquarie University students involved, and I'll describe that a little later on. One of the keys here is getting agriculture to be cool, and working with kids who are in the age 7 to 13, 14 years of age, and tying agriculture to science in the curriculum. The third strategic goal is in the area of community-based organizations, recognizing that sustainable household income is critical to the well-being of rural families. Fourth strategic goal would be in the area of water and sanitation at household, school, and community levels. In addition to putting in 20-some boreholes throughout the district, we also work very conscientiously in terms of school sanitation, nutrition, and the link between the two. Fifth goal would be climate smart innovations, and this runs across all of our areas, both livestock, crops, and the storage and handling of grains. And Tom and Thomas will describe more about that one in a moment. We also have a sixth goal, which is completing the development of a training and demonstration center that's established for both community members to use as well as university students. And improving school-based facilities, as I mentioned, things like dormitories, latrines, school kitchens, and things like that. I mentioned that I'd say a few words about how we get university students involved. We have a binational service learning program that involves equal numbers of students from Macquarie University and Iowa State University in service programs throughout the year. And the goal with this program essentially is to develop future hunger fighters, future Norman Borlaugs, the future scientists who will work on the significant problems that we are all working on today. One of the things that the students do, and Tom Brum is part of that as well, they work alongside the students out in the fields, working to cultivate the school gardens. And one of the outcomes is that there's no one in this group at the end of their months-long program who romanticizes about being a small farmer in a tropical area. They're much more realistic in their understanding of what it takes. A special shout out to the leadership of my colleagues at Iowa State University. You can see we have a number of associate directors, each of them an expert in their own area. And what they tend to do is they backstop our team in Uganda. So questions come up, or strategic planning, evaluation, extra training. They're involved with supporting the team in the field. So with that, I just thought I'd be very brief because we want to allow as much time as possible to get input from the webinar attendees, because there'll be many areas where we could improve, we could partner, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks very much, and I'll stop sharing my screen at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Acker. Before I turn it over to Tom Brum, we are having some technical difficulties with Thomas Buyinza. Hopefully he'll be able to join us soon from Uganda, but so just saying that we're trying to get him on the line now. But anyway, I will turn it over to Dr. Tom Brum from Iowa State University. Tom, I think you're muted.
There and there. Sorry. I got multiple screens going on here and I can't figure out which one is which. I think I've got everything here. So greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. What I wanted to do was share with you some particulars about what we're doing in the Kamuli district in Uganda with our post-harvest programs. It's really been the last 3 or 4 years that we've kind of cranked up our efforts there. And some of this I want to share with you. It may be kind of old hat to many of the researchers. We know that about 30% of the food across the world is wasted or lost, that it's raised and it never makes it into people's mouths. In higher income countries, much of that happens at the consumer level, but in places like Uganda and sub-Saharan Africa, much of that food is lost before it even gets to the people to eat it. So this is not a new phenomenon, but it's a very significant one. In Africa, on average, for the grains at least, we see 10 to 23% loss of post-harvest losses before it even gets to the consumer. So with the smallholder farmers that we work with, storage losses 20% is actually pretty normal, that people see that. And we've seen cases often as high as 50%. And one of the major things there, which I'll talk about later, is insects that consume the grain in storage. And one of the things I learned in my travels to Uganda and Kamuli is controlling post-harvest losses for these smallholder farmers can be the difference between being hungry and having extra that they can sell and use the income. So again, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but there's kind of 3 areas that we look at as sources of maize post-harvest losses. And I'm going to talk a little bit about maize. That's the primary crop that we're working with. It's almost every smallholder farmer grows it. Almost all of the people there in Uganda eat it and rely upon it. So rodents and birds are a problem. So that's something you can solve with site hygiene or better storage containers. Storage molds are important, an important problem because they have difficulty drying the grain. You need to get it to about 14% or less so it doesn't mold. And this is often challenging because sun drying is usually the only option. And that's not the best drying technology. And then insects in storage can consume a large amount. And the pictures you see at the right, the top picture is what happens to the maize kernels. The larvae and the pupa eat the inside and you're just left with a shell with nothing inside. And those holes are where then the adult burrows out to escape the kernel. And the bottom is just a bag of maize that was at one of the schools that we were working with. And those little black specks that you see on the bag, those are maize weevils. So this is a very common sight to open up a bag of maize in the schools or in a smallholder's farm and see this kind of infestation. So one of the other things that we're concerned about, and again, I'm probably preaching to the choir, is mycotoxins. So mycotoxins are metabolites of certain fungi, and they're endemic across all of Africa. Aspergillus flavus, Aspergillus parasiticus, and they create something called aflatoxin, and it's one of the most carcinogenic substances that we know. In the United States, the action limit where it can't enter the market is 20 parts per billion. And in the EU and in Uganda, the action limit is 10 parts per billion. And this is not an easy thing to detect. It's not visual. The tests tend to be expensive and need to be run by trained personnel. But we do know that the effect on all people, and in our case, children in particular, is very significant. Stunting, delayed development, and in both children and adults, liver damage and liver cancer. I recently saw a poster published by Feed the Future about aflatoxin, and they quoted a statistic that 10% of deaths in Africa were due to liver cancer. That's pretty incredible. So that's kind of the background. Let me talk a little bit about what agriculture looks like in the Kamuli region. In general, in Uganda, as Dr. Acker said, has great potential, great amount of natural resources. The FAO says that Uganda has the potential to feed 200 million people, which is good because in not too many years, they're going to reach 100 million people. Since the time I was there, when I first started going about 12 years ago, the population was about 30 million. Now we're up to 45 million. So the very large population growth. About 69% of Uganda's population is employed in agriculture, and it's a huge part of their economy. It's 24% of GDP, and it's 45% of their export earnings. So their export crops are coffee, tea, cotton, and tobacco. But when you get to the smallholder level, it's a little different. So smallholders, which are about 2.5 hectares, plus or minus, are about 89% of all farmers in Uganda. And these are folks that are just growing the crops to subsist. The main crop among most of the smallholder farmers are maize and beans, but they also grow a variety of other things that include sweet potatoes, cassava, bananas, mangoes, rice, millet, etc. If you go to a smallholder farm in the Kamuli district, it's all intercropped. So you see beans growing amongst the maize, amongst the banana trees, etc. And there is some livestock, chicken, pig, goats, and cows. And really, having livestock is kind of the next step up in development for these smallholder farmers. It provides some financial security. So in the United States, in our country, for example, you put money aside in the bank so that when your car breaks down, you can pay for it. In Uganda, their reserve is a pig. So it provides a little financial reserve for them. So the smallholders in the Kamuli district that we work with, there are some challenges that they face. So they aren't able to expand the amount of land. So similar to other places around the world, land is inherited. You can only split it so many ways. And when the population is increasing, there's not more land to cultivate. Inputs are very expensive. As Dr. Acker said, many of the people are in poverty. They live on less than $2 a day. They can't afford the seed, the fertilizers, the pesticides, or the things that we in high-income countries would think are important. Something that's changed, even in the time that I've been there, has been due to climate change, the rains are unreliable. It used to be for generations that you could count on when the rains would come and when they would stop within a week or two. And that was enabled the farmers to time their planting and harvesting very, very precisely. But now you're not really sure when the rains are going to come, and that causes them some problems when they plant and try to cultivate their crops. Many of the smallholder farmers that we work with don't have very good post-harvest practices, and in particular with maize. So they don't do a good job drying. It's all sun drying, and oftentimes it's just spread out on the dirt or on the floor or on the ground. Now they do some things to make the ground more or less porous. They rub it with cow manure, for example, to get kind of a sheen so that's easy to clean, etc. They also store in polypropylene bags, which isn't necessarily bad, but it doesn't do anything to stop weevils, and it doesn't do anything to stop rodents. One of the problems then, because of poor storage and loss of grain in storage, 85% sell their crop at harvest because they know they can't store it. So that means they have to accept the poor price that happens right at harvest. Oops. So I had a couple of aha moments that really helped me kind of jumpstart. As an academic, you know, you read all the papers about food loss and smallholder farmers, but unless you've actually been there, for me anyway, it wasn't really real. So Nakonyonyi Primary School is one of the schools that we work with. And it's common practice at the primary schools is that parents pay school tuition with maize. So typically 5 kilograms of maize will pay for the term for their child. And they use it in the school feeding program, or what we would call school lunch. And at Nakonyonyi, they stored it in polypropylene bags. It was in the corner of the headmaster's office, and it was under lock and key, so nobody could get to it. And they had scrupulous inventory records. So, you know, every day, how much grain they received, how much was used, what the balance was, etc. And in 2016, one of the student projects was to, okay, let's take their records and see exactly, does the inventory agree with what's actually there? And what we found was over 53% of the maize that they took in was lost, just gone. And a lot of that was due to insects. So that's important. That's a whole month of school feeding. So it was a significant amount. The second aha moment I had was with our nutrition education centers. So what we provide fortified porridge for infants and children that are at risk. And so we would buy maize from the marketplace, and then we would hire local millers to make flour out of that maize, and then we would make this porridge. So in 2017, we tested for the presence of mycotoxins. And what we found was in the flour that we were using, that there were significant levels of aflatoxin that exceeded the standards. And that was a wake-up call for us. Now, because we knew that aflatoxin was present, we have a moral obligation to do something about it. We cannot do this anymore. So I guess that was a little more than an aha moment. That was kind of a clarion call for us to change our practices. So we knew we had to get a handle on our supply chain. We couldn't, with the objectives of, we need to preserve the quality of the grain that we have to limit the post-harvest losses, and we have to eliminate all exposure to aflatoxin. We just, morally, we cannot feed the people there with using ingredients that contain aflatoxin. So we had a number of tactics. The first was, we realized that this is just not an add-on activity for the existing staff. We had to hire someone to oversee our post-harvest programs. This was so important that we just needed to bite the bullet and make the expenditure. So thank you to David Acker and the other folks at CSRL, because they supported expanding the budget to include this. And the person that we hired is on the call with us tonight, or today, Thomas Buyinza, and he'll talk later about what he sees in the Kamuli district. The second tactic is, whenever possible, we need to control the supply chain. We need to know where the maize is coming from. We need, and the other ingredients that we use, we need to know their quality. We need to be able to store it properly, etc. The third is, in all of our programs, we need to use and promote good post-harvest practices. And for us, that includes hermetic storage, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then lastly, we test everything for aflatoxin. So we have two ways to test. One is some quick strips, which are more of a yes or no. It's relatively easy and our staff can perform it. You take appropriate samples, grind the grain, mix it with methanol, put the strip in, and it gives you a line of yes or no. Does it exceed the limit? It's sort of like a pregnancy test. The other way that we test is we send samples off to Macquarie University, to their laboratory there, and they give us an exact amount of what's going on. Whoops. So controlling the supply chain. The first thing that we did was we stopped buying from the marketplace. So we had no idea what the history was. You can't really tell when you're there if the grain has it or not. The tests take a while. So now we work directly with a number of farmers that use good post-harvest practices, and we buy maize directly from them at higher quality, and we pay a little bit of premium to do that. And in working with these farmers, that we know that they're drying the grain properly, they're handling it properly, they're storing it properly. The next thing we did was we became millers. If you went to some of the millers in the Kamuli district, these are local entrepreneurs that are really quite inventive. The one that we were using made his own hammer mill to grind the maize. And when they would grind it, they'd blow it into the corner, right? And they'd have one portion here and one portion here. They are also debranding it. And then they just scoop it up with a shovel, and there really wasn't sanitation in between. And so you really didn't know if the bag of maize that you brought in was going to be the same maize that came out as flour and bran. So we decided that we were going to mill our own. So at our facility in Kamuli, we've installed a small milling device, and I can't remember exactly, we do a couple of tons a week, I think, is the amount. So, and then of course, we're going to store all of our grain hermetically. The barrels that you see in the above picture hold about 300 to 350 kilograms of maize, and we use that to control the insects in all the ingredients that we use. And then of course, we test everything for aflatoxin. So one of our big programs is at the schools, and that's poses another challenge because we can't control the supply chain like we can for our ISU-UP programs, because the students are bringing in the maize, and that can come from anywhere. So the first thing that we did was we trained the school and the kitchen staff on good post-harvest practices, how to clean the maize, how to dry the maize, how to store the maize. And we even developed a little flow chart for them to look at of what to do when maize comes into the school. So we made sure that all the maize that was brought to the school was cleaned and dried. When we first started, a lot of the storage facilities were just a room that they could lock, that they could put bags in. That was the storage facilities. And if you looked, the idea of keeping out rodents and other things just wasn't part of where they were looking. So now, especially as we build the kitchens at these primary schools, we include provisions for grain storage and using hermetic silos. And again, at the schools, then we do good sampling and we test all the maize for aflatoxin. And if we find that there is maize that has aflatoxin, we replace it with maize that we know is okay. So it's not perfect because we can't control what's coming in, but at least we know that we're not feeding the children lunches that have aflatoxin in it. So that was that's kind of what we're doing for our own programs, but at the same time, our mission is to really work in the communities. So we did a survey amongst the smallholders in the community to understand what they knew about post-harvest practices, etc. So what we found was some of the smallholder farmers were using these good post-harvest practices, but many were not. And many of the smallholders just accept post-harvest losses as a fact of life. It's just what happens. There's nothing I can do about it. What we also found was most have heard of aflatoxin, but they really don't know what it is or what the effect it is. We even had some people say that, well, I think it causes malaria, or so there's a lot of misinformation out there about aflatoxin. So one of the things that we've done is instituted a training program to train smallholder farmers in the community and participants in our nutrition education centers in good harvest practices. So we talk about proper drying, we talk about moldy grain, we talk about storing, etc. And since 2014, we've trained over 10,000 people in good post-harvest practices. And Thomas is the one that's leading this effort. So thank you, Thomas, for the good work that you're doing. We've started something called Rural Community Enterprise Programs for distributing hermetic silos and tarps, and I'll talk about that. And then the third thing that we're doing is we're kind of experimenting, demonstrating, and introducing some labor-saving, scale-appropriate post-harvest technology. So let me talk to you about the Rural Community Enterprise Program. You might think of it as a microfinance program. We kind of think of it as a little more than that. So we piloted a program in 2019, and we purchased hermetic silos from the World Food that were made by the World Food Program at the incredible price of 150,000 Ugandan shillings. So that's about $40 US. And we quote sold it to 20 smallholders and gave a 50% subsidy. And within a year, they repaid that. So Thomas will tell you some stories about the people who have used these barrels and what their effect has been. Essentially, these hermetic silos will allow people to store their maize for a period of time until the market price is better, and then they can sell their grain at a much higher price. So, and then the tarp allows them to more safely and sanitarily handle their maize. So it was very interesting. I was had an email conversation this past week with Brett Ryerson, who is formerly of the World Food Program in Uganda and now is with an NGO in Uganda, about are subsidies the right way to go about this. So it's kind of the age-old dilemma in international development. If you don't subsidize, you can't get it into the community. You can't get the technology introduced. But when you do subsidies, that people think that's the real cost of the intervention or the technology, and they'll never pay the full price, so you never get good adoption rates without the subsidy. So the real price for the hermetic silo and tarp is probably double that. It's around 300,000 Ugandan shillings. So we think the silos are a great program. They have an opportunity to have great impact, but we're thinking now whether what is the right approach. Should we be subsidizing at these levels? How do we encourage farmers to understand the real value? Even at 300,000 Ugandan shillings, the extra money that they will make will more than pay for the silo over a couple of years. But demonstrating that to farmers and convincing them that is another thing. The other hermetic products that we've looked at, has been the triple bagging. The PICS bags from Purdue are very good. The cost is about the same long term per kilogram of maize stored. The initial price is much, much lower, so there's an entry point there. We like the hermetic silos because they also protect against rodents. You can lock them because in some of the areas theft is an issue. And we're starting to get a little worried about an insect pest called the larger grain borer, which we don't have a lot of in Uganda, but it is present in East Africa. And the triple bags don't stop the larger grain borer. They can bore right through it. So we have a lot of work to do, I think, in figuring out where we're going to go with the hermetic silo program or hermetic storage in general. We know it's a good technology, and we need to figure out what the next step is to implement a larger, much larger program. Excuse me. The last thing I want to talk about is introducing technology. This isn't core to what we're doing, but it's been, you know, as an agricultural engineer, it's been kind of fun for me because it's an opportunity to develop and prototype some things that work in the community. So one of the things that I've done is to support projects by Macquarie University engineering students to design and prototype different technologies that we could use in the field. Two that we've implemented lately. One is a pedal powered grain cleaner. So if you look at the top picture there, the student, engineering student who did this, his group of people, they've got a research development grant from Macquarie University, and they've built 5 of these now, and they're currently out in the Kamuli region, and they're being tested, and their hopes is to make a business out of this. So again, Dr. Ackler talked about capacity development, and so in my little world of engineering and post-harvest, this is my capacity development, both supporting the engineering students who work on post-harvest losses and to promote development of companies that can develop technology out there. We've also done a hand-powered amaranth thresher. Thomas is going to talk about amaranth. That's a crop we're promoting. And I've spent quite a few hours in the brief time that I was there sitting on a tarp with a stick, whacking amaranth to thresh it, and the engineer in me saying there's got to be a better way. So I had a student, a Macquarie student, who created a hand-powered amaranth thresher. The other thing that we're working on, we've built the first portable maize dryer. This is something that was developed in a project from USAID and the Bill and Linda Gates Foundation. It's called the Easy Dry M500 portable dryer. It was developed in Kenya. It all breaks down and you can put it on a motorcycle, on 2 motorcycles. And we're starting to use it to dry all of the ingredients that we have. So it's a simple and relatively straightforward way of drying grain and getting out of the conundrum of relying on sun drying. That's all I had. It was just kind of an overview of our programs. I'll turn it back over to Kyle and we can move on to the next presenter, Thomas.
Thank you, Tom. That's the breadth of that is I'm always taken aback when I hear your presentation. And now I'd like to introduce Thomas Buyinza, who is coming to us from Uganda, from the Kamuli district, and he is a post-harvest loss specialist. Thomas, take it away.
Okay, thank you.
Thomas, do you want me to share the screen? Would that be easier? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I can do that, I think. Hang on.
Yeah.
Because I have your presentation that you sent me this morning.
Yeah, that will be better for me.
Okay.
So.
How's that?
That is better.
Okay, go ahead and just tell me when you need to.
Okay, so I will share a bit more of the implementations in Kamuli, and also some farmer stories, also stories from the teachers of the schools we work with, plus some from the pupils of the ISU-UP partner schools. So like Tom talked about, I'll start by sharing about the grain amaranth, which is a crop that we promote in Kamuli, mainly because of its high nutritional components, being a blessed crop highly rich in lysine amino acid. that lacks in most of the crops, and very important for the malnourished children and also for breastfeeding and pregnant mothers. So we started promoting these crops since 2006, but our farmers had a challenge of using mainly local methods to thresh the amaranth when it is mature and ready for harvesting. So, and when the amaranth lay in the gardens, the ears that contain the grains could burst and they experience loss. So through our partner university, the Makerere University, and the students that come for internship, the engineering student, George designed and locally fabricated the hand-operated grain amaranth thresher, like you can see in the picture on the right. That is at a school in Namasagali. It's called Namasagali Primary Schools. Here, they were training. The other service learners and the interns were training the pupils and teachers how to operate this simple machine. So this helped on the reducing on the losses because it helped to ensure quicker threshing of the grain amaranth so that they don't delay in the field and thus losses are not experienced. Also, it saved the time for pupils because they could spend more time threshing beyond break time and they could lose some study hours. So this has really helped. The traditional method of threshing were use of the wire mesh and also rubbing in between hands. And that one they could only do to a maximum of 14 kilograms per hour per one person. But this simple thresher machine can do up to 60 kilograms per hour. That is per one person and with a frequency of over 80%. So it has really helped, and the schools can now thresh as much as grain amaranth they can as possible. And it saves also the losses in time and cost. So that is it about, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the next slide is about a farmer story. The farmer here is the teacher at St. Joseph Nalwoli Primary School, which is also one of the schools we work with. And this is about the pedal-operated seed cleaner, specifically for cleaning maize. And it's a teacher, the lady you see at the fifth on the, when you consider right, left in the picture, she's called Rebecca. So she was sharing with us a story, how they used to clean maize before they received this machine. And they were using the traditional winnowing. Winnowing is by aspiration, blowing air to remove the chaff and the dust. And also by using the mesh. These are simple wire mesh put on wooden stands. But this could take a lot of time, and the maximum they could clean per hour is 200 kilograms. Still, this could cause pupils to lose time that could be used for studies. And also for other farmers which are not at school, they could take a lot of time cleaning. But then also through our partnership with Makerere University, a student, Ismail, locally designed and fabricated this simple pedal-operated maize cleaner, which our farmers and the schools are currently using. And like Tom talked about, we have still partnered with them, and they have made 5 more cleaners. This time they are multi-crop cleaners. They can clean more than one grain. They can clean maize, they can clean grain amaranth, they can clean soybean, they can also clean millet. You just make adjustments and can clean more than one. So it is really very good. The multi-crop cleaners have just been tested And so we are piloting that one, and they will outscale it and they make it commercial, like Tom talked about. So this hand pedal operated cleaner, it can clean up to 800 kilograms per hour. That is just for one person. So this saves time. The farmers would spend cleaning locally, and also it saves the time for the people. But also this cleaner can separate insects, especially weevils, through the wire mesh, which traditional winnowing or aspiration couldn't achieve. So this is also so nice. And also another story was it being fun operating, especially when you're pedaling. For people like pedaling on bicycles, it's like you're riding, like the whole of your body is moving. So it is part of physical exercise. Actually, they are cleaning the grain as they do physical exercise, and that keeps them very fit and it's always fun. That's why in the picture you see actually people fight. They compete to use the machine, and all teachers enjoy riding, like the pedaling as they clean the maize. And this, the one which has been recently designed and fabricated, the multi-crop one, will really achieve great because it can clean very many grains. Next slide. Okay, so another one is also a farmer story. This is about the rural community enterprise, which also Tom highlighted about, where we gave, in a pilot study, where we gave 20 subsidized silos with a tapling to farmers. These are smallholder farmers. So we gave a silo and a tapling at a go because we were trying to cover the whole supply chain of grains, like Tom talked about, so that a farmer can dry the grains on tapling, and then also is able to store the clean dried grains in the hermetic silo. So this is a story from one of the beneficiaries called Robina, and she's a lady in the picture. That is second on the left. So with her grandchildren, she was sharing with us a story of how she used to dry grains on bare ground because she had no tapling, and also she lacked knowledge about if there is any challenge actually drying her grains underground. But through the trainings, the participatory post-harvest training we have had, she got knowledge about the need to dry on at least a surface like tapling or any other raised surface, so as to prevent her grains from contamination, contaminants in the soil like microbes that will produce toxins. And then also she used to store in the interwoven polypropylene sacks, which could easily be damaged by insects, and also other storage pests like the grain borers. So we gave her this a silo and a tapling on credit, which she paid in 2 installments. Tom talked about us buying these silos from a community-based organization supported by World Food Program. It was a community-based organization which they were accessing these silos from World Food Program. Then as we accessed from that community-based organization, and they were giving us at that 150,000. Then we subsidized by 50%. So she paid 75,000, and this is she paid in 2 installments. So she was telling us she can store her maize and it remains safe even up to a year. that is if she has harvested much and she's not willing to sell immediately, maybe because of the low prices. And also if she wants to keep for future household consumption. So she said she's now no longer worried of what she will give her grandchildren, because at least that silo you see in the picture, if it is maize, it can store at least 330 kilogram. If it is for smaller grains like grain amaranth, it can go up to 400. Yeah. So she's sure there's at least food for her grandchildren. So that is a story from one of the 20. Others, from one of the 20 who received the silo, and that happened. Next slide. So last slide, that is a picture on the left. That is the hermetic silos we use for storage of grains. These are for the school feeding program and also for the community nutrition program, where we supply to the nutrition education centers. Tom talked about this also. This is at our field house, but also we have at the respective schools we work with, and also at the farmers, and also in the hosts of the nutrition education centers, but also for our training center we have for the livestock program for storage of feeds to prevent also the increase in microbes, which will produce mycotoxins. So we consider also safe storage of both animal feeds and of course the human foods. So also I highlighted some challenges we face, and during implementation of the post-harvest program, and one is poverty. Poverty limits the use of the improved practices, because actually all improved practices we are promoting comes at a cost. But you find many farmers are limited, they can't afford them. That's why the idea of subsidizing comes in and relief a bit. But also even when we subsidize, there are those who can't really afford. And we can really say some are left out because they can't even afford the amount which is subsidized. There are many actually. So also there's a limited desirable market for the quality produce. Actually, there are few, if you consider the market, open market, mostly the deciding factor actually is just the price. How much are you selling? It's only a few organizations like now Iowa State University Uganda program and the World Food Program and other few organizations that consider quality. So you find that sometimes if many farmers produce good quality produce actually, and times they don't get the real desirable market, or someone paying how much, like what is necessary for their quality produce. Maybe the good thing is that they are able to consume good quality and safe, but if you consider it commercially, sometimes the market is limited. A few people are willing to pay high amount of a cost to cater for safety and quality. And also there's some instinct of conservativeness among many farmers. There are those really who take long to adopt the new practice you're bringing in. And it is also still affecting, but with more collaborative efforts, like talking about social changes and the behavioral communication, we hope we shall be handling them slowly and they will be adopting the new practices. But actually there are those who are still conservative, not willing to change it, to go to improve the practices. Then also I highlighted some opportunities that we have. We still have in the field as we promote the improved practices. And one is that many farmers are willing to share cost for the improved practices. for all the technologies we are promoting. Like we highlighted about the hermetic silos, where we subsidized only by 50%, and they were willing to pay the remaining 50%, and actually the 20 we piloted, they paid, also in the 2 installments as we had planned. Then also for other technologies, these were silos and tarpaulin. So what we were thinking also about is for the machines, for example, the multi-crop cleaners. If with time, if we make them movable, like by putting the tires, and we can roll them on motorcycles. So we hope to make it also cost share, like where a small scale commercial farmer can buy this and then maybe move by cleaning for other farmers, and the farmer pay cost. So, but then also another opportunity is that farmers are willing to host these trainings in their gardens, in their homes, and they are willing to train others. So they are willing to act as model farmers or our ambassadors to train fellow farmers. So these are a few of the opportunities I highlighted, of course, plus others. So this was the last slide. I think that's what I had to share with you, in addition to what the 2 presenters shared earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And thank you to all the presenters. And now we're at the hour mark, but we're going to take questions now. I hope everyone can stay for the question and answer portion of the webinar. The first question comes from Jessica Crawford, and before I ask Jessica's question, you can ask your question in the question and answer box. Should be down at the bottom part of your screen, and type those in, and I'll read some of them. I might not be able to get to them all, but I will read some of them out. So the first one is from Jessica, and her basic question is, you know, with the effort that goes into producing kind of mycotoxin-free grain, but is there a market to actually benefit from that additional effort, the cost-benefit analysis of that? And I know that, you know, in the Iowa State case, there is a market because you're paying more, but I just want to ask you, you know, Thomas, Tom, David, about this question.
Yeah, so, you know, this is kind of a universal human behavior question. We face it in different ways in the United States. You know, as long as there's some minimum quality, you know, then it's all about price. And I think the same is true in Uganda, that the markets aren't willing to pay for high quality. I think the way that we can introduce the technology, though, is the benefits of minimizing post-harvest losses. So if a farmer is experiencing 30, 40, 50% loss in storage, and you can present to him a way, or her, a way that they can not incur that loss, then they have more to sell, which coincidentally will be of better quality. But the economic case, I think, that we're making to the farmers is not that you're going to have this great quality. That's certainly a benefit, but there's no market to pay for that quality, as Thomas said, but that you will have more to sell because you're not losing it to the insects. And if you can delay and if you can store, just like farmers do here in the United States, right? If you drive across Iowa, you see grain bins everywhere on farms because farmers are storing grain so that they can control when they sell it. And if the barrels, the silos enable the smallholder farmers to do the same thing, they can capture the benefit of increasing price. Because at least in the Kamuli region, the price is always the lowest at harvest, and then it increases gradually as stores decrease across the community until the next harvest. So if you can store, not only do you have more grain to sell, but you can sell it at a higher price. At least that's the case that we're making to our farmers. I hope that answered Jessica's question.
That's a good question. Thomas or Dave, did you have anything to add on to that?
No, not from
Yeah.
my side.
Okay. I do find it interesting though that you are actually creating a market, even if it's a local market, based on quality grain though. So this is not I wouldn't say it's a one-off, right? And so it could be I mean, this idea of quality grain, if once it makes it to a standard, yes, but I think that this innovation, there's also farmers know that they can sell into this market in the district, right?
Well,
So,
right now it's a market of one,
okay.
us.
Yeah, but I mean,
But perhaps there will be others that would want quality grain, aflatoxin free, etc.
Yeah.
And maybe that will be an opportunity. I guess, you know, initially our intentions were just very selfish. Well, not selfish, but just for us, that we needed quality grain. So maybe we can be a model. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, there are some organizations, also world food programs actually pay higher price. Some farmers have benefited by selling to world food program. Then also there's some company in Ginger called AgroWays, and they also pay higher price for this. So there are only a few, but we are not the only ones, not only ISU-UP actually. So there is also recently, this one came in recently. There's also Plan International. They also started buying especially grain amaranth, clean one. So, and these ones have just come in maybe as the quality, as we continue to get more farmers producing quality and safe grains, I think the market will be expanding with time.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think this question is for Thomas. With your kind of training that you do on hermetic storage and technologies, have you seen, has there been a significant change related to adoption of the technologies? Have you seen a change in the behavior and the actions of farmers with relation to your interventions?
Yeah, actually, because for the one we gave out, because we started giving out actually in February, that is 2019. So, and we have been doing monitoring every after 2 months. That is to record change in the behavior and in the practice and in the attitude that is related to the adopting the improved practices, like following the appropriate drying procedure, that is making sure they store appropriately dried grains with moisture content of at least 13%. So there's really a very good change, and the farmers who have benefited from these hermetic silos, the one who received, they are practicing good practices, and they have good knowledge about the toxins, the carcinogenic one we have been talking about. So for those who have benefited, they have really positively changed, and they are practicing the good practices we promoted.
Great. I have another question from Nora from Self Help. Do you have a business model as a result of using the post-harvest loss technologies that justifies the payoff of using the technology? Is that something that you've developed, and maybe not, but if so, you know, anecdotally, has the kind of business case resonated with farmers? So I know that this is the the pilots of some of these are just new, but if you could talk to that question.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Well, I'm just an engineer, so I don't know that much about business models. But what I do have, when we were setting this up, I put together a very simple spreadsheet that looked at all the costs, the increased benefit or price by storing in these hermetic silos, the subsidies, et cetera, and calculated payback period. So for example, the program that we did where we provided a 50% subsidy showed that you could pay back the entire amount of the silos in 2 growing periods, assuming that you took 50% of the benefits to yourself and then use 50% of the benefits to pay back the credit to buy the silos. So that's pretty incredible. So I think even if you looked at full costs, we bought the barrels cheap for about half price for the program, that you could still see that you can pay off these barrels in just a handful of growing seasons entirely. And these barrels last for 10 years or more if you take care of them. So I think we need to think about how do we communicate the economic benefits of good grain storage to the smallholder farmers, because it pencils out. You can make money. So, but communicating that is another matter entirely.
I have a question here about whether in the nutrition program, is there a dairy component part of the nutrition feeding program, and could that be a part in the future?
I could probably talk about that just for a moment. So originally we did not choose cattle as an investment area, primarily because that's a large investment for an individual household. So we focused in on the smaller livestock. That would include poultry, the small ruminants, sheep and goats. And so that has not been a major portion of our nutrition education program, that is dairy. That being said, animal source protein combined with grain or plant-based proteins are I would say the magic formula in some of our weaning foods that the mothers are using. So for example, dried fish added to the fortified porridge would be a component that would increase the protein levels. That being said, we are now beginning a new program with our new Associate Director, Dr. Curtis Youngs, in working on cattle introduction, and he'll be working with Dr. Gideon Iope, who is a veterinarian. So this is an area that we can expand into. Thanks.
Great. I have another question about where more maize is sold in the formal or informal markets, and is there kind of a overarching food safety policy that maybe is available for the informal markets, and perhaps that knowledge could make grain or feed safety more acceptable, could improve. Is there kind of a food safety policy plan in place across the partnership? Thomas, David?
Well, I mean, we have a set of best practices that we use. And there are food safety regulations within Uganda that we follow to the best of our ability. But like many regulations in these areas, there are regulations, and then there's what actually happens in the marketplace, and sometimes those two. For example, in Uganda, there's a standard for aflatoxin, but yet it's the aflatoxin is everywhere. So because there's limitations on how that can be implemented. So we try to follow best practices in all that we're doing. Some of that may not be directly written policy promulgated by a government or a organization. But I think we can serve as an example to others of how to do it right.
Great. I just have a question from Mike. And he was wondering if farmers kind of open this is for Thomas, kind of open the silo between storage and marketing, and does that introduce kind of the ability for insect infestation? I hope I got that right, Mike. You can tell me later if I didn't.
Well, I think that, and Thomas can answer, or did he? Yeah, Thomas can answer whether it actually happens. But the problem is, once you seal the grain, you have to, and close the silo, you have to keep it sealed until all the insects are dead. That depends on the degree of infestation, et cetera. Usually it's at least, we recommend at least 30 days. But if you keep opening and closing the grain, then you don't asphyxiate the insects. So you got to seal it that whole time. Once all the insects are dead, then you can open and close it at will because there's no insects in there. So I don't know, Tom, and that's all part of the training, right? You just don't give people the barrels and say, okay, put your maize in there, right? You have to help them understand how to manage the grain and store it. So Thomas, maybe you can give your perspective.
Yeah, before we give actually, for the farmers, they undergo a series of trainings. One about the appropriate harvesting and then post-harvest practices to make sure they are really having ready, clean, and of good quality maize to store. And then also how to actually store the clean grains in the silos, how to load, and the importance of not opening the top cover. And we take them all through those procedures that if you're to pick, at least use the down. On that silo, there's a down hole where you can remove a cover and pick from downward. Because down, there is limited airflow. Air cannot easily enter when you pick from down. Oxygen, that is needed by the living organism inside. So that one prevents air entry that could cause microorganisms and other insects to grow. And then, so the farmers understand all that before they take the silos. All those demonstrations are done to them. So, and then the opening of the top cover is done only when they are emptying, when they are removing all stored grains.
Thank you, Thomas. I have two quick fire questions, and I'm going to turn it back over to Steve. The first quick fire question is, when you find aflatoxin maize in your supply chain, what do you do with it? How is it dealt with?
So the first thing is, if we know it has aflatoxin in it, and Thomas, again, you can correct me, it can't be used for human purposes at all. So that takes it off the table. What we do, right, we don't have the opportunity to just bury it and we can't sell it because we know it's contaminated. What we do is move it into animal feed and we blend it down to levels below the action limit. So in the United States, that's not the common practice of what we do. But over there, we remove it from human consumption and then blend to a level that's acceptable for use in animal feeds.
Okay.
Yeah, just on that a little, the challenge, like in Kamuli and many parts of Uganda, soils have the aspergillus molds that produce the mycotoxins and secondary metabolites. So you find we just meet the minimum levels, that is the 20 for the international standards. So if we have read about these grains and their aflatoxin are higher than the safe limit, we blend and use for livestock, like Tom talked about. If we have not yet bought, we reject, we don't buy those grains. So the farmer takes back, we don't pay and use for the nutrition programs. If we have tested and they are for farmers, we advise accordingly. We advise the farmer not to consume, or the trader who has bought, if those grains were for traders, we advise that they are actually not safe according to the standards. They don't meet the standards for human consumption. Then we advise that you can blend with other grains and use for livestock. And then it is upon the farmer or the trader to decide after we have advised.
Great. There are a number of questions that we didn't get to. I apologize for that, and we will have we'll have a record of those questions so I can send them out to the appropriate people so we can get your answers back if we didn't ask your questions. But before we close, I want to throw it back to Dr. Steve Sonka.
Thank you, Kyle. And thanks, Tom, Thomas, and David. It's a really good, comprehensive presentation, but also one that, at least in me, inspires hope because we're making progress. We're identifying a lot of problems, but we're making progress. One thing I did want to comment on is there were some questions about a business model and economics. And at the consortium over the next year, we'll be doing some research, really trying to build a supply chain model that integrates the effect of improving post-harvest loss. And what that means, yes, for the farmer, but can we then see how that might translate down the supply chain where typically we find a pull, a demand for segments of the market, and being able to quantify that is something we hope to accomplish. But again, thank you, Tom, Thomas, and David for an excellent presentation today. Back to you, Kyle.
Thank you. I really want to thank all the panelists for being here. And before we leave, I just want to say that we will be having our monthly webinar again at the end of next month. That topic isn't set yet, but our September webinar topic is set, and it'll be the interface of pre-harvest and post-harvest strategies to control diseases. And the leaders of that will be Volcani in Israel. So that will be in late September. We will have one in August though as well. Again, thank you so very much for attending. We really appreciate it, and you will be hearing from us some more. So with that, have an excellent day or night.
Bye.